How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed's guide series on Waterdeep Dragon Heist, a 5th edition module. Today we're going to be covering the explosive Chapter 3. So of course there's going to be a ton of spoilers. Players don't watch this, but DMs that want added insight, go ahead and stick around because we're going right on in. And by explosive, I did in fact mean explosive. We are here in Chapter 3 Fireball. This chapter takes place once you feel like your players have done enough in the city of Waterdeep and you want to get them moving along with the main story. Mind you, Chapter 2 can definitely be the big bulk of this adventure, and Chapter 3 is going to spiral them into the big grand finale because there is a lot of things going on here. They are going to be personally affected by this, while yes, they themselves aren't going to be hurt by this fireball, unless you really want them to. More than likely, if you run it as written, what's going to happen is a fireball is going to break some of the windows of Trollskull Manor, and it's going to launch them into this investigation, and it's going to spiral them to finding the Stone of Galore, and with that Stone of Galore, they're going to find the Vault of Dragons, and then inside of the Vault of Dragons, they're going to get all the gold, or of course, if they could get interrupted by any one of the villains. So, of course, in this book, we're not given an exact timeline, an exact frame of when you are supposed to kick this off, but go ahead and leave it to your own desires. Some people run Chapter 2 as 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 sessions, and then they finally kick off the fireball. Or if you're just trying to run a very quick adventure, then you have Chapter 2 be maybe a single session, and then you go ahead and kick off with this fireball. Entirely depends on what you want out of this game. Do you want this game to be on a more of a railroad, or do you want this to be more freeform? Do your players want more freedom, or do they want more structure? It really depends on your party. Once you decide that the fireball is kicking off and your players start heading into Chapter 3, go ahead and read off this blurb, and then your players can definitely see the destruction that has happened right outside their domain. So why is there a fireball in the middle of Trollskull Alley? It's because Dalakar, a gnome, has in his possession the Stone of Galore. Unfortunately for him, he was being tailed by the Zentarum, but before the Zentarum could even get to him, he got hit by a fireball, specifically a fireball that was thrown by a Nimbleright, and this Nimbleright was able to cast this fireball because they had a necklace of fireballs. Now, why was Dalakar in possession of the Stone of Galore, and why were they bringing it to the party? Well, they stole the Stone of Galore from the Xanathar lair after it had been taken elsewhere, and because of all the agents that are located around the city, they didn't have any actual way of getting out. So they decide, hey, we're going to bring it to that group of adventurers I've been hearing about. But of course, the Zentarum are right on his heels, but then he got struck by that fireball. Now, what is the relationship between the Zentarum and this Nimbleright? Well, you see, these Zentarum are in fact agents of Manchun. They are in league with the Growhoons, which are pretty much just down the street from Trollskull Manor. Because you see, this Nimbleright is actually in control of the Growhoons. The Growhoons and the Zentarum have a bit of a relationship going on. They said, hey, we'll work together and we'll split that big pay once we go ahead and find the Vault of Dragons. Of course, the Growhoons are going to go ahead and backstab because this is an awesome action-adventure story where the bad guys are betraying each other left and right. So this Nimbleright is tailing the Zentarum and Dalakar, and when the time's right, the fireball strikes, killing the Zentarum, except one survives. That one is Floxen, who is kind of pissed. Floxen was able to duck out of the worst of the fireball, grab the Stone of Galore, and made his way back to the Growhoon Villa. And this is where your player's adventure is going to kick off here. They are going to be making their way outside, and then they'll be able to investigate the crime scene. So once again, there's something that you really need to discuss with your players, and this is the player buy-in. Do you tell your players right away the adventure that is taking place? Do you tell not the characters, but the players that, okay, here's the adventure, something is going to happen and you're going to chase after it, or you're just going to lay it down and hope that your players stick to it? Because theoretically, you could have the fireball go off, and realistically, there is some groups out there that won't get invested in it. They won't chase after the Stone of Galore because maybe they just don't think about it. Maybe they forget about Renaer and Neverember talking about it, and they just go about their daily lives. In which case, there is the adventure just passing right by them. So make sure that the player buy-in is there. If you want to run this adventure as written, then they need to follow along this path. Of course, you can totally take this thing completely off the rails, and that's perfectly fine. You can run Waterdeep Dragon Heist as Waterdeep Adventure Lifetime, right? Instead of them chasing after some Stone of Galore, instead of them dealing with some crazy factions, it's just them living their lives, you know, working in a Trollskull manor, and then interacting with the fun NPCs they've already interacted with, and you can go ahead and craft your own stories. That is something that you need to reconcile with your group, your party, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to join the Waterdeep Dragon Heist Discord and the Reddit. Over there are so many people that are in similar boats like us, where sometimes our groups do crazy and wacky things. So go ahead and join those, and we can discuss all the amazing things there, because we can get some great insight off of one of another's stories. We can talk about other supplements you can go ahead and add to this thing, how we can go ahead and change the entire story to fit our own narratives, and all that fun stuff. This fireball was pretty gnarly. It didn't outright destroy any buildings, but it did kill 11 people, in which there is a full dossier of them right here. And it's really unfortunate because some innocent people got caught in the blast. So of course, if a fireball pops off right in the middle of the city guards are going to arrive, but it's going to take them several minutes to get here in force. During that time, your players could theoretically go ahead and start searching the bodies and asking for any witnesses. A search of the bodies, accompanied by a successful DC 15 perception check, will reveal that one of the dead men has a black winged snake tattoo, which obviously indicates a Zentarum, but more importantly, the dead gnome has in fact a whole bunch of gems on their person. And another very interesting thing here is that their boots and cloak reek, suggesting that they had been in the sewers recently. And hey, if any of your players get any inclination to go down to the sewers, maybe you can use some of these maps. Brought to you by Foxglove Armor. Some incredible maps, links down below. So of course, if you got players with some sticky fingers, they're going to find that pouch and say, ooh, 500 GP, sign me up. But they must make a DC 13 sleight of hand check, or else someone in the crowd is going to witness, and at which point your players do have to make a choice. Do they go ahead and bribe this witness, or do they go ahead and turn it in to the authorities once they arrive? Of course, guards are going to arrive after a few minutes, in which case they're going to go ahead and cordon off some things and go ahead and get the witnesses to stay there. And what's also really cool to note here is because there's smoke lingering, then Griffin Cavalry is going to go ahead and show up. You know, just adding more to the scene of your players are really stepping into a scary game here. There's fireballs going off, there's griffins flying all about, you know, things are getting serious here. 20 minutes after the explosion, that is when these two investigators are going to show up, Saith Cromley and Barnabas Blastwind. So these two are a bit more methodical, they're not going to jump to conclusions, and more importantly, they're going to realize that because the fireball damaged a whole bunch of the local surrounding area, then it's probably not anybody that lives around here. So they are going to go ahead and ask the players some questions, but they know that the players don't have anything to do with it. So they're going to go ahead and keep those investigations brief. So of course your players may go ahead and scream out, oh please, let me help you, let me help you with the investigation. But of course they're cops, why the heck would they let civilians in on this? So if you go ahead and allow this, then your players can make a DC 15 persuasion check, and then they may go ahead and be let in on the investigation, in which case they'll go ahead and divulge the information that the gnome was being pursued by several people, the gnome was heading to the Trollskull Manor, and the gnome did not see the pursuers or the attack coming. Another part of this investigation is the eyewitnesses, in which case we have three. We have your neighbor Fala. Fala saw Erstal Floxen escape the depths of the fireball and make his way out of the Trollskull Alley. The second eyewitness your players could talk to is Jezerine Hornraven, who in fact saw the attacker, though she doesn't know exactly that it's the attacker, but she saw that it was a Nimbleright. She's going to describe it as a puppet, but that is going to clue in your players to who this person is. And lastly here we have Martum Trek. Trek unfortunately lost some friends in this explosion, and of course is a 12-year-old little boy. So your players have to approach this with a delicate hand, but if they are able to successfully intimidate or successfully talk to this individual, they can get that necklace of fireballs, of which there are 2 beads remaining. So of course a lot of players would love to get their hands on Necklace of Fireballs because this is only level 3, people don't even have access to the spell Fireball yet, so it's pretty strong. But if they keep this evidence and they do not turn it in, and more importantly they get caught, then this will be a crime, in which case they'll have a fine up to 200 GP and hard labor for up to a 10-day. So hopefully, if they do decide to take this thing, they don't get caught. So hey, we're playing D&D, a super high fantasy action-adventure game. And of course, there's a spell called Speak with Dead. So your players may go ahead and say, hey, why don't we just talk to the dead people? In which case, they can go ahead and do so. If they have renown with any of the factions, then they can go ahead and call in a favor. Otherwise, they can go ahead and pay a donation of 25 GP, and they can cast Speak with Dead on the dead people. In which case, they'll get some very pertinent information from Dalakar, who's going to reveal all the information about the artifact and the Stone of Galore, and where they were going and what they were doing. And also very important, if they talk to the Zentarum members, then they are in fact going to learn a bunch of information about the Zentarum, about Growlhorn Villa, and about Erstal Floxen. There is no information here about what happens if your players cast Speak with Dead with anybody else here, but hopefully they should know that those people were just innocent people caught in the blast. But if your players do so, then you just go ahead and conjure up that the innocent people don't have anything to say because they didn't see it coming and they were just doing their everyday business. So during the course of this investigation, your players could do a number of things in order to find out that they need to go to the Growlhound's villa. If they only catch a piece of the information, then they'll be going down a certain line, and if they catch all the information, they may go ahead and approach it in a number of different ways. If your players latch on to the information that there is a puppet-like individual, they may start asking around and may discover, oh yeah, that's actually resemblant of a Nimbleright. Here's the thing. A person that spent their whole lives in the city of Waterdeep, they would recognize these Nimblerights because they are in fact part of a parade that happens every year. So if you have Waterdeepian natives or someone that spent maybe a year or two in Waterdeep, then hey, they're going to know that it was a Nimbleright, in which case they can go ahead and make their way to the House of Inspired Hands. However, if you're running a campaign where literally everybody is new to the city, then they'll have to go ahead and ask around a bit. In which case I would go ahead and just leave this up to maybe your players have to bribe someone, or they just talk to someone, or whatever the case may be. But you can easily steer them into the right direction. Go ahead and say, oh yeah, every year there's a parade full of automatons, and it's hosted by the House of Inspired Hands. When your players arrive to the House of Inspired Hands for the first time, you get a little text blurb here, and actually describes this Nimbleright. So when your players arrive here for the first time, there's a cute little combat where one of the Nimbleright's inventions goes ahead and attacks the party. Thankfully, it actually can't really do too much, and it's only got 1 HP, so if your players just hit the thing, it blows up. But, of course, there is the slight possibility that this thing goes ahead and crashes in the party, in which case that'll be pretty hilarious. So what is the significance of coming here? 2 things. 1, this Nimbleright that your players are going to interact with, Nim, actually created the Nimbleright that is working for the Growlhounds. The second part being your players could get themselves an item which will help locate a Nimbleright all around, which will prove very useful if they don't go to the Growlhounds immediately. Inside of the temple, we get immense detail about using this location. Absolutely awesome. Once again, making this city feel real, feel lived in. Your players show up to any random building, and then all of a sudden you get all this detail. That's pretty awesome. And then we also meet with the character Valeta. Valeta is going to go ahead and talk to the players for a bit, and eventually go ahead and say, hey, let's go ahead and meet with Nim so we can get this whole thing discussed. Nim, being a Nimbleright, can't talk. So there is a sign language barrier here. Once your players ask the tough questions, then Nim is going to admit that it built the other Nimbleright to appease its loneliness. However, the other Nimbleright left about a month ago and hasn't been seen since. During this revelation, Valeta is going to say, oh, no, you're not allowed to build anything again, and goes ahead and removes all of these things. Pretty sad, really. There's definitely a whole arc to be had with Nim as a fun ally, and of course some things you can do with that. But for the instance of the story, we're going to continue on with the detector. Once your players have a thorough investigation around here, they'll be given this item, the Nimbleright detector. This Nimbleright detector will allow your players to walk around the city, and it will go ahead and ping if you get within 500 feet of another Nimbleright. Nim planned on using this, but Nim couldn't leave the location, so it's pretty much worthless to them. Valeta is going to go ahead and say, hey, have this thing, and the house will go ahead and give you 500 GP if you destroy that other Nimbleright. Pretty awesome. What's also really cool about the reward structure here is not only are you given that 500 GP, but you also get these incredibly useful and fun little trinkets. Adjustable stilts, a backpack parachute, a barking box, and a matchless pipe. These things can be absolutely awesome and absolutely a blast to use throughout the course of this campaign. And the best part is, once you give these to your players, you can totally invent these scenarios where these are totally applicable, and they will make the players feel awesome for getting these rewards. You know, that backpack parachute there, just imagine you have to go ahead and climb some skyscraper tower and then fall all the way down using this thing. Like, that's cool, right? You know, you can use so many different combinations of awesome story beats or whatever else and have these items in store, and it'll just be absolutely awesome to use. So with the Nimbleright detector in hand, your players can go ahead and start searching around the city of Waterdeep for the murderer. And this can, in fact, take a tremendous amount of time because literally walking around everywhere holding this thing in your hand would take ages. So, of course, in-game, this would take a long time. But your players could do a number of things to alleviate that. They could go ahead and hire a dray or a horse and try and speed around the place. They could use some sort of magics. They could also, in fact, we get this big old text block here, of hiring a griffin. If your players have the right credentials and make a DC 16 animal handling check, they could theoretically hire a griffin to fly around, and that would be totally awesome. So no matter how your players go ahead and approach this, they go on foot, they hire someone, they use magic, whatever the case may be, however they choose to do it, go ahead and ask them, how they are going about it. Are they going and making a zigzag pattern? Are they going left to right? What is their style and method here? Because they can go ahead and receive 2 results. The first one being the Growlhounds, which will go ahead and lead them to the second half of this chapter. But the fun interaction to be had here is if your players accidentally make their way down all the way to the dockyards, then they will have an interaction with the Drow crew. So in here we get this big old detail list about what happens if your players make their way down to the dock ward and interact with the Drow crew there. They will actually be invited to interact with Zardoz Zord, who is of course Jarlaxle Bainray in disguise, and your players can have an absolutely delightful time on the Drow ship, and of course they can really set up future events here. If you've got some people that are interacting with the Brigand Dareth, there can be some interactions there. If your players actually have Jarlaxle as the main villain of this campaign, having this interaction early on is absolutely fantastic. And even if Jarlaxle isn't the main villain, there's so many fun things and interactions to be had here. There's a lot of information to be gleaned here, so use it. Set up things for the future, and of course, present this as a fun time. You know, this adventure is all about having a fun time. Your players get involved in some investigation, but hey, they get to have a fine dinner with a fine dining host. You know, that's incredibly awesome. Now, of course, Jarlaxle is a pretty suave guy, and he does not give away his appearance because of all the illusion magic that's going on around here. But your players could theoretically see through some of it using a DC 14 insight check, or by somehow dispelling the magic all around, in which case Jarlaxle is going to be impressed. He's going to say bravo, and he's going to wait for the party to see what they do next. Of course, if any fight goes down, especially at level 3, Jarlaxle is going to win, because not only would Jarlaxle destroy a level 3 party on his own, but also the fact that he's got a big old crew around him. So if a fight does go down, Jarlaxle's not going to be dumb. Jarlaxle's in fact going to use the party. He's going to beat them up, go ahead and slap them into submission and say, hey, how about you go on your merry way and you do you? In which case, of course, Jarlaxle is going to be a great foil to be used later on. Of course, your player's investigation might not be going swimmingly. Maybe they failed a whole bunch of rolls. Maybe they just didn't think to ask the right questions. Maybe they just go ahead and expect people to come to them. In which case, go ahead and provide that, right? Have Renaer Neverember show up. Renaer can give a great exposition about what's going on here, and this can lead your players to the right direction. Your players can go ahead and discern, oh yeah, there's totally a person there, and they totally work for the Growlhounds. Where do the Growlhounds live? Oh hey, just so happens that they live down the street from our Trollskull Manor. Awesome. Use these plot points to your own desires, tailor them to your party. If you have a group that loves to just randomly seek out random things, then yeah, just keep it a mystery. Allow your players to go ahead and mount their own investigation. But if you have a group that loves being pushed down the railroad, then go ahead and feed these to them, and they're going to have a blast as they go from awesome set piece location to awesome set piece location. Now, eventually your players will uncover that they need to go to the Growlhound Villa to find the Stone of Galore. And here it is where the story is finally going to diverge. Depending on what villain that you have, the motives here are going to be unique and different. And it's going to be a fun time. This is where you as a DM are going to have to start spreading your wings, as there's going to be more NPCs to interact with, and of course more factions working in the mix. What is going on at the Growlhound Villa? Who is the parties involved, and where the heck is that Stone of Galore going? Well, we're going to be talking about that in the next one, in the conclusion to Chapter 3. But that'll be for next time. So go ahead and tell me, are you digging Chapter 3? Do you like how you're drawing your players into this awesome storyline? Or do you think that's a little bit too restrictive? Do you think that your players have enough clues to find what it takes to solve this mystery? Or are you going to have to feed them everything along the way? Go ahead and tell me all those things, because I want to know. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for listening. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.